Hi students, I hope that you had an awesome weekend. As always, I'm here if you need anything, if you would like extra tutoring or help, I'm available via email, or we can set up a time to Google Meet or meet up on Teams. So feel free to contact me with anything. We have been talking about surface area, and today we're going to jump into our lesson or unit on volume. So this is lesson 8.4. We're talking about the volume of rectangular prisms. And as we know, just to review, surface area is the amount of space on the outside of a prism or the total area of all of the faces. So for example, if you were to take your favorite cereal, mine is Captain Crunch, although I do not eat that very often. And if I were to cut along the line of the edges of all of the shapes and unfold that box, I would be able to see all of the shapes that made up that rectangular prism that holds my cereal. And if I were to take a measure or to take a ruler and to measure the faces and calculate the surface area, that would be the space that the outside of the box took up. So if I were to add that all together, that would be the surface area. And we're talking about volume. Volume is the amount of space that a three-dimensional object takes up. So the capacity of an object. So that is not only the area on the outside, it's also the volume in what is inside an object. Now we measure volume in cubic units, and we can write cubic units as U. This just represents any unit cubed. So we call to the third power, we call that cubed. Okay, and a cube with a side length of 1 unit, so 1 unit, so length, height, and width is all 1 unit. And this has a volume of 1 cubic unit. So we write that as 1 cubic unit. So this cube is a total of 1 cubic unit. And we use cubic units to measure the volume of rectangular prisms. Okay. So cubic units and volume. We can pack unit cubes. So this little guy up here, we can pack unit cubes side by side without any space between them and find the volume of a rectangular prism. So for example, if we count the amount of cubes in this rectangular prism, we can find the volume. And I know it already tells us this is 18 cubic units, but we see that this is 3 by 2, which means on the bottom layer, there are 6 cubes. And if we multiply 6 times 3, or we do 6 plus 6 plus 6, we get a total of 18 cubic units, which we would write as 18u to the third power. And you might notice, well, Miss Nelson, you could just multiply all of these. You could also do that, and that's going to bring us to our next concept, which is the volume formula. So we know that area, if we're finding the area of a face, it would be base times height, okay? But we're going to take that one step further, and it's going to be length times width times height, or the volume of the area of the base, which would be base times height times height. So this is our formula. Volume equals length times width times height. And many of you may have learned or briefly talked about this in 5th grade. Length times width times height. Okay, so we're going to do an example together. This is just taking it one extra step, and we're finding the volume of this rectangular prism right here. So we would multiply 4 times 10 times 3, and I know that these are labeled in inches. So I know 4 times 10 is 40. 40. Then I'm going to multiply 40 times 3, and 40 times 3 is going to give me 120. And if you would like to use a calculator on this, I don't mind. It's always good practice to practice our multiplication tables. But if you want to use your multiplication chart that's in the front of your planner, feel free to do that. Or if you would like to use a calculator, I'm also fine with that, just as long as you're doing your calculations correctly. So we would write this as 120 inches cubed. Remember, we don't write squared, we write squared for surface area, but since we're multiplying 3, think about if we would multiply x times x times x, we write that as x cubed, x to the third power, or x cubed, because we have 3 of them. Just like if we're multiplying inches times inches times inches, that would give us 120 inches cubed. Okay. All right, we're going to look at example 2 here. So we could do this a couple ways. We can use our formula, or if you so prefer, you can count the cubes. Whatever strategy works for you. A shape will get to a certain size where counting cubes might be tricky, but if that makes sense in your mind and that makes sense to you, then you can also do it that way. Okay, so we have 3 centimeters times 4 centimeters times 5, so I'm going to multiply 5 times 3 times 4. Okay, so if it makes sense to you, you can do it this. 5 times 3 is 15. And then we'll multiply 15 times 4, which would be 60. So 60 centimeters, and you can't see that. Let's see if we can move my picture. Centimeters cubed. 60 centimeters cubed, or it might make sense for you to think, okay, it's 3 by 4, which means on the base I have 12 cubes, and I have 5 layers, so 12, 24, 36, 48, 60. That could also make sense to you to know that there are 60 cubes or 60 centimeters cubed. Okay, now here is the part where you are going to try on your own. I want you to pause this video and see, maybe using 2 different strategies, if you can find the volume of this rectangular prism. Go ahead, pause it. No, really, pause it. Okay, so now that you've paused this and done it on your own, we'll check our answers together. So we have a base of 5, a width of 2, and a height of 2. And now there are a couple ways that I could do this. I could see that on my base, I have a layer. So I have 5 by 2, which means I have 10 cubes on the base. And I have 2 layers. So 10 plus 10, that would give me 20 centimeters cubed. Or I could see that 2 times 2 times 5. 2 times 2 is 4. And 4 times 5 would be 20 centimeters cubed. 20 centimeters cubed. Okay, now what I would love for you to do is there are 2 practices on Khan Academy. One is an example with the cubes, and then one is just with rectangular prisms. I want you to go ahead and go try on your own.